The 1930s were a time of global turmoil. The world was reeling from the effects of the Great Depression, which had begun in 1929 and continued to wreak havoc throughout the decade. Economies were collapsing, unemployment rates were soaring, and people everywhere were struggling to survive. This period of economic instability and social unrest created fertile ground for radical ideologies to take root and spread. The Great Depression shook the world economy, factories shut down, banks failed, and millions of people found themselves out of work. Bread lines and soup kitchens became common sights in cities around the globe. The desperation and uncertainty of the times led many to question the existing political and economic systems, paving the way for new, more extreme ideas to gain traction. Powerful ideologies like fascism and militarism were on the rise. In Europe, leaders like Adolf Hitler in Germany and Benito Mussolini in Italy capitalized on the chaos, promising to restore national pride and economic stability through authoritarian rule. These movements emphasized strong, centralized control, often at the expense of individual freedoms and democratic principles. In Japan, these forces combined with a sense of national ambition and grievance to set the stage for a period of aggressive expansion. The Japanese government, influenced by militaristic and nationalist ideologies, sought to assert its dominance in Asia. Propaganda campaigns promoted the idea of Japan as a superior nation destined to lead the region. Japan had emerged from the 19th century as a modern industrial power. The Meiji Restoration had transformed the country from a feudal society into a technologically advanced nation. By the 1930s, Japan boasted a robust industrial base, with factories producing goods for both domestic consumption and export. This industrial strength was a source of national pride and a key factor in Japan's ambitions. It had also experienced rapid population growth. The population boom put additional pressure on the country's resources and infrastructure. Cities became increasingly crowded and the demand for food, housing, and jobs grew. This demographic pressure contributed to the sense of urgency among Japanese leaders to find new territories to support their burgeoning population. This created a need for resources and markets that Japan felt it lacked within its own borders. The islands of Japan were resource poor, lacking the raw materials needed to fuel its industries and sustain its population. Leaders believed that securing access to resources in other parts of Asia was essential for the nation's survival and prosperity. Many Japanese leaders believed that expansion was the only way to secure the nation's future. They argued that Japan had a right, even a duty, to extend its influence and control over neighboring territories. This expansionist mindset was driven by a combination of economic necessity, national pride, and a desire to emulate the colonial powers of the West. The military played an increasingly powerful role in Japanese politics during the 1930s. Military leaders gained significant influence over government policy, often advocating for aggressive actions to achieve their goals. The civilian government found itself increasingly sidelined as the military's vision of expansion and conquest took center stage. They argued that Japan had a right to establish dominance in Asia. This belief was rooted in a sense of racial and cultural superiority, as well as a desire to protect Japan from the perceived threats posed by Western powers and neighboring countries. The idea of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere was promoted, envisioning a region under Japanese leadership. They pointed to the Western colonial powers as an example, claiming that Japan deserved its own place in the sun. The success of European empires in Asia and Africa was seen as a model to be emulated. Japanese leaders argued that their nation had the right to build its own empire, one that would bring prosperity and security to its people. This combination of economic anxiety, national pride, and militaristic fervor created a dangerous cocktail. The Japanese public, influenced by propaganda and nationalist rhetoric, increasingly supported the idea of expansion as a solution to the country's problems. The stage was set for a series of aggressive moves that would have far-reaching consequences. Japan's leaders, driven by a belief in their own destiny, embarked on a path that would lead to war and ultimately to devastation. The pursuit of empire and the desire to assert Japan's place in the world order led to conflicts that would engulf the region and bring untold suffering. The ambitions of the 1930s set the stage for a tumultuous and tragic chapter in history. Japan's expansion began in 1931 with the invasion of Manchuria, a resource-rich region in northeastern China. This marked the beginning of a series of aggressive military campaigns that would reshape the geopolitical landscape of East Asia. The Japanese military, driven by a desire for resources and territorial expansion, saw Manchuria as a prime target. The region's vast natural resources, including coal, iron, and fertile land, were highly coveted by Japan, which was facing economic difficulties and resource shortages at home. Using a staged incident as a pretext, the Japanese army quickly overran Manchuria, establishing a puppet state called Manchukuo. This puppet state was ostensibly independent but was, in reality, under the tight control of the Japanese military. The establishment of Manchukuo was a clear demonstration of Japan's imperial ambitions and its willingness to use deception and force to achieve its goals. The international community watched with growing concern as Japan's aggressive actions threatened the fragile peace in the region. This act of aggression was condemned by the League of Nations, but Japan simply withdrew from the organization. The League's inability to take effective action against Japan's aggression highlighted the weaknesses of the international system in the face of rising militarism. Japan's withdrawal from the League of Nations was a bold statement of its defiance and its determination to pursue its expansionist policies without regard for international opinion or diplomatic consequences. Emboldened by its success in Manchuria, Japan turned its attention to China proper. The Japanese military believed that further expansion into China would secure the resources and strategic advantages needed to establish Japan as the dominant power in East Asia. This ambition set the stage for a prolonged and brutal conflict that would have devastating consequences for millions of people. In 1937, a clash between Chinese and Japanese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing escalated into a full-scale war. This incident, though seemingly minor, was the spark that ignited the Second Sino-Japanese War. The conflict quickly spread, engulfing large parts of China in a brutal and protracted struggle. The Japanese military, equipped with superior weaponry and training, launched a series of offensives aimed at subjugating China and consolidating its control over the region. The Second Sino-Japanese War, as it became known, was marked by incredible brutality on the part of the Japanese military. The conflict saw widespread atrocities committed against both combatants and civilians. Japanese forces employed ruthless tactics, including mass executions, forced labor, and the use of chemical weapons. The war caused immense suffering and displacement, with millions of Chinese civilians caught in the crossfire. One of the most horrific examples of this brutality was the Nanjing Massacre. This atrocity, also known as the Rape of Nanjing, stands as one of the darkest chapters in modern history. The Japanese military's capture of Nanjing, the then capital of China, was followed by a 6-week period of unimaginable violence and terror. Japanese troops captured the Chinese capital in December 1937 and unleashed a wave of violence against civilians and prisoners of war. The soldiers went on a rampage, committing acts of rape, torture, and murder on an unprecedented scale. The city's population was subjected to systematic and indiscriminate violence, with no regard for age, gender, or status. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, were killed in a frenzy of rape, torture, and murder. The exact number of victims remains a subject of historical debate, but the scale of the atrocity is undeniable. The Nanjing Massacre left deep scars on the collective memory of the Chinese people and remains a poignant reminder of the horrors of war. The Nanjing Massacre shocked the world and became a symbol of Japanese wartime atrocities. International observers and journalists documented the horrors, bringing global attention to the plight of the Chinese people. The massacre galvanized international condemnation and highlighted the urgent need for accountability and justice in the face of such egregious human rights violations. It also demonstrated the dangerous ideology driving Japan's expansion, a belief in racial superiority and a willingness to use extreme violence to achieve its goals. This ideology, rooted in a distorted sense of nationalism and militarism, justified the subjugation and exploitation of other nations. The consequences of this ideology were devastating, leading to widespread suffering and loss of life across Asia. The legacy of Japan's wartime actions continues to shape the region's history and collective memory. With the war in China raging, Japan turned its attention southward towards Southeast Asia. The Japanese military, already deeply entrenched in China, saw the rich lands of Southeast Asia as a vital extension of their empire. The region's abundant resources were too tempting to ignore, especially as Japan's own reserves dwindled due to the ongoing conflict. Rich in natural resources like oil and rubber, Southeast Asia was crucial to Japan's war effort. These resources were essential for maintaining Japan's military machinery and supporting its ambitions. The oil fields promised a steady supply of fuel, while the rubber plantations were vital for producing tires and other military necessities. The lush landscapes of Southeast Asia held the key to sustaining Japan's war machine. However, it was also controlled by Western colonial powers, primarily the United States, Great Britain, and the Netherlands. These nations had established their dominance over the region, exploiting its resources for their own benefit. The presence of Western military personnel and the flags of these powerful nations were a constant reminder of the formidable opposition Japan would face in its quest for expansion. Japan's leaders believed that a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, would cripple American naval power and allow them to seize control of Southeast Asia before the U.S. could respond. They meticulously planned the attack, hoping to deliver a decisive blow that would leave the United States reeling and unable to interfere with their expansionist plans. The map of Pearl Harbor became a focal point of their strategy sessions as they envisioned a swift and overwhelming victory. On December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier-based aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor, sinking or damaging numerous battleships and killing over 2,400 Americans. The attack was executed with precision, catching the American forces off guard. The sight of the USS Arizona burning and the damaged battleships and aircraft was a stark testament to the ferocity of the assault. The devastation was immense and the loss of life was staggering. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a gamble and it backfired spectacularly. Instead of crippling the American spirit, it ignited a fierce determination to fight back. The headlines in American newspapers screamed of the treachery and the need for retribution. The U.S. Navy quickly mobilized recovery efforts, salvaging what they could from the wreckage and preparing for the long fight ahead. The attack had awakened a sleeping giant. Instead of intimidating the United States into submission, it galvanized American public opinion against Japan and brought the U.S. into World War II. The sight of the American flag being raised once more became a symbol of resilience and defiance. Enlistment lines grew as men and women from all walks of life answered the call to defend their nation. War propaganda posters urged citizens to support the war effort, and the United States, now fully committed, embarked on a path that would ultimately lead to Japan's defeat. Despite the miscalculation at Pearl Harbor, Japan's initial offensives in Southeast Asia were stunningly successful. Japanese forces, using a combination of speed, surprise, and brutality, quickly overran British Malaya and captured the supposedly impregnable fortress of Singapore in February 1942. The Philippines, an American colony, also fell to the Japanese. American and Filipino forces fought bravely but were ultimately forced to surrender after a grueling siege at Bataan and Corregidor Island. The Bataan Death March, in which thousands of American and Filipino prisoners of war died from starvation, disease, and mistreatment, became another infamous symbol of Japanese brutality during the war. By mid-1942, Japan had conquered vast swaths of territory. from Manchuria in the north to the Dutch East Indies, present-day Indonesia, in the south. Their empire stretched across Southeast Asia, encompassing Burma, Thailand, and much of the Pacific Ocean.